All right, welcome everybody. Let's talk about how the internet really feels about my day job. So I'm going to set the stage because I know how much Keith loves this, but March of this year, I was actually gearing up for a 2-week vacation with my wife and racing to get all my stuff done when this happened. And it kept happening a lot. First, for those of you in the room who are watching who called, checked in on me, said, "Hey, is this you?" I appreciate it. Thank you. It was ugly. Luckily, it happened 18 months after I started working on this problem, and we were mostly done. Well, as far as we are right now. Also, thank you to the trolls on the internet. Hopefully, none of them are in the room, but they gave me a bunch of material for this talk, and hopefully we get some laughs out of it. Secondly, I hope this never happens to you. I'm not used to my job being in the public spotlight, and it was not fun. So, let's talk about the contentious physics problem that caused this whole thing, right? And I can't think of a more quintessential Wi-Fi problem than CCA signal detect, right? This is like the quintessential thing that makes Wi-Fi work. And for the examples we're going to use, we're going to talk about signal detect as neg 82. Now, people can argue sometimes it's 4 SNR. Different vendors may say, well, we do something slightly different. That's cool. This is for demonstration purposes. We're going to talk about it in terms of neg 82. And some rough math, right? If you're at 9 dB of EIRP, that gets you about 150 meters out to neg 82. So that's how far you're going to be tripping CCA in free space. At 15 dB, it doubles, so 300 meters. This is the largest of the 3 buildings. It's a roughly 250 meters corner to corner. So just some rough scale. And it's a pretty high ceiling, somewhere between 25 and 37 meters, depending on where you're at. So this is the concept art for the building, right? They took teams, they rotated them around, they spread them out, they took all the resources and stuck it underneath, and we ended up with this big flat floor. It's actually the second floor, underneath a giant metal dome. And you'll notice that the architecture of this building is somewhat unique. There's lots of free space. Almost everyone who works in this building's desk is on the second floor, meaning there are no walls, there are no attenuating objects to stop this signal from going around. And when you walk in, this is by far one of the most impressive buildings you will ever enter. It is massive. So. But keep in mind, this all leads to the fundamental problem. So let's talk about the first problem, which is just free space path loss, line of sight. 250 meters, yeah, I don't have that. So these 2 APs, as far apart as you can get them in the building, are going to hear each other and contend with each other. Now the internet says, oh, of course, you just need more APs, right? Has nothing to do with the roof. Of course not. So I actually had this thought very early on. And so a rough poll, how many of you guys think 95 APs on this floor produces more capacity? How many of you guys say 36? Nope, nobody has any opinion? 36, all right. Answer is neither. Well, I don't necessarily mean either. Statistically insignificant, right? We couldn't tell a difference between these 2 scenarios. Why? Because, well, 95 APs, we had more MCS. We had higher MCS rates. We had some reuse. Not a lot, but we had some. But we had, in 36 APs, we had a lot less overhead. And because of the nature of that signal going everywhere, we had a lot of hidden node and a lot of retries. 20%, I think, was the number I heard earlier. I would love it if it was 20%. So then we get into the fundamental problem in this building, which is the dome, right? And Pythagoras sucks because although I still get that 300 meters of free space path loss, I'm not quite going 300 meters, but it's still significant. And that means I still don't get to use the channel anywhere close to that AP. So, but the internet says roof architecture shouldn't affect the Wi-Fi design. Signal goes down and out like a donut, right? Yeah. Well, I hate to tell you, everything above the halfway point goes up, right? Whether it or not it's the peak signal. So if this is a 15 dB EIRP, guess what? 5 dB is going up. And that's still significant, right? So if we lower the ceiling, what happens? Well, we keep the Wi-Fi down here where stuff is, right? There's desks, there's people. There are some attenuating objects down here at this height that are not 100 feet up in the air. And so this is the normal scenario that we have in almost every office building. And when you take that away, some strange things start to happen. But it's not just more access points, fewer different brands, more knowledgeable people operating it. Ouch. But it's not just the dome. It's also the floor. Now, this is the second floor of this. This is a raised tile floor, like you might find in a data center. And those tiles are built, several manufacturers, but usually there's a steel bottom followed by concrete, and then there's some debate. Some of them just put carpet over the concrete. In this case, there was a steel plate on top of the concrete that the carpet is attached to. And let me tell you, commercial carpet doesn't attenuate much. It is very reflective. So not only are we bouncing stuff off the ceiling, but the stuff that does come down goes back up. And again, we're getting closer. We can get some reuse in the building. Not as much as you would need to cover this kind of space. So it's also not the floor's fault, meaning those large chunks of atrium space. If you were standing in the atrium on the first floor, you can hear every access point on the second floor, because if you can see the dome, you can see every access point. So, and with 30 plus atrium spaces, something like 12% of this, let's call it 450,000 square feet. It's a significant bridging of those two RF domains. So I'm not even getting reuse completely down to the first floor. There are some smart people on the internet, I swear. This person's like, hey, it's just like a stadium. Let's design it like one. Well, there's some things we have in stadiums that we don't have in this building. We don't have giant concrete concourses that seating's bolted to. We don't have all of that attenuating material. We also don't have a lot of bodies to surround access points. And so everyone who's like, I'm sure Dan Jones would love, under-seat access points without a lot of attenuation and a very reflective floor, it doesn't actually make that much difference. So how is it not a stadium, right? So a stadium, you don't typically design for the capacity on the field, right? You design it in the stands. We don't have the same density of users or even just attenuating materials. The closest you could say is, this is like the empty stadium scenario, which is not always good. And the use cases are radically different. I get complaints if you're less than 25 megabits a second. Like that's a poor Wi-Fi experience apparently. And I was like, man, if I had 25 megabits a second in a stadium, I'd be super happy. But that's not the case here. We also have a lot of low latency use cases, right? Most people aren't conducting business on voice and video calls all day, every day in the stadium. So I wish it was a stadium. So how do we solve this, right? And we threw everything we could do at this. It was, we brought in specialized consultants, RF testing in the space, materials testing, helping us with RF design, getting specialized antennas to help solve some of the back and side lobe problems. We ended up doing some hard looking at what can we get away without. And it's like those atrium spaces, we're not going to cover those because it's It's like, where do we have to prioritize Wi-Fi? And as a Wi-Fi engineer, that's the terrible thing. You want to put Wi-Fi everywhere, you want great coverage everywhere, and having to say, hey, I can't put Wi-Fi there because if I do, I have to give most of the bandwidth upstairs to the people working at their desks. I have to give that away. So making those decisions was tough. But like most network engineers, when things don't work, what do? You throw bandwidth at the problem. So 6 gigahertz to the rescue, right? We ended up putting LPI overlay network in and facilitating, let's go purchase a bunch of 6 gig devices such that we can offload from Wi-Fi. It's not a fix, but if it gets you relief from this problem, it works. And then we had to do a lot of other non-traditional things. There were places where we really needed signal and we couldn't get away with it. So we had to do RF shielding, right? And the note I will tell you about RF shielding, it's easy to put in. If, like paint, it's hard to take back out if you need to get rid of it. So use cautiously. Also, make sure you have a good plan of where that paint is going to go. Channel grouping, this is a controversial one, right? So in places where we're not going to get channel reuse, putting APs on the same channel close to each other. Why? Well, if I'm going to have CCI, I sure don't want hidden node. And that was a problem that kicked our butt repeatedly in this. And then cables, lots and lots of cables. And we had to, not only do we have to do cabling, we had to do ways to make it, as Keith would say, fast, frictionless, right? So it had to be easy. And so it was docking stations that had power and Ethernet and monitors, right, at scale. So did we fix it? No, absolutely not. We worked around the problem. The cost estimates for fixing it were a lot. And no one in their right mind would pay for it. So. But on the internet, there are people who do say, hey, I work in this building and it's fine. So obviously, some of the things we did worked. I've never had to plug in. That's the thing I love to see the most. So obviously, we did do something right. And for those of you who think, oh, you fixed it. No, this was 2 years and 4 revisions of Wi-Fi network. I'm sure the vendors love me because we just kept putting new hardware in. We started with the raised floor tile antennas. Obviously, there were challenges considering they're pointed at the dome. That didn't work super well. We put omnis on poles. We had coverage, but high CCI. And we did some things to make the aesthetics folks happy that were not operational. You couldn't see the APs, you couldn't see the LEDs, you couldn't tell if they were installed correctly or not. And that was lessons we learned that when we did it again, that was the requirement. You have to see them, I have to be able to look at them and tell that the LED is correct, right? And then we reduced the AP count, and we didn't really get anywhere. I thought overhead was gonna be my enemy, and it turned out it was just an offsetting factor. And then we put in 6 gigahertz, new hardware. It helped, right? We're blessed that we have a lot of 6 gigahertz clients going back to Pixel 6. And so we were able to offload traffic from 5 gig onto 6 in order to kind of ease the problem. And then we came up with what our current approach is, which is what we call a bifurcated AP, which is a really complicated term to just say we did 2 APs. This is what a bifurcated AP looks like. We have a pole with 2 APs on it. One uses 5 gigahertz horn antennas. You don't typically see horn antennas out in the Wi-Fi world outside the lab, but we picked them because of very idealized antenna patterns. And then we had to do some shenanigans with how SSIDs get broken up between these two. And so, 6 gigahertz, the giant metal dome is also somewhat challenging for things like standard power. It also wasn't approved when we started this, so we had to kind of figure out how are we going to offload 6 gig and not really impact 5 gig. And I had to also figure out some way to get PSE channel, deal with channel discovery because, we didn't get any reuse in 6. So instead of deploying 80 or 160 or some crazy channel width, we deployed 20 megahertz, just so we had channels available. So, we ended up getting about 2 spectral use out of the bifurcated APs. Anywhere you can see the dome, it's a bifurcated AP. Anywhere you can't, it's a traditional, just single Omni. We ended up getting about 50 channels worth of capacity out of that. And we get 52 channels in the US for 6 gig. So we effectively quadrupled the amount of throughput on that second floor. And 2.4, it's just there for R&R. I mean, we do have some very low 2.4 use cases, but we really needed something for R&R. And because the APs are so close, we didn't want to do a 5 gig R&R in the bifurcated AP setup. So our Horde antenna, very idealized pattern. This is what makes a lot of the reuse possible. In terms of very idealized, Hamina will be happy. It'll probably be really easy to trace this one. But that was part of the choice, was how do we deal with spectral reuse? And yeah, directional antennas, getting no back lobe, getting no side lobe was really instrumental in getting some reuse. But we're not done, right? These buildings are here for the long term. I think one of them is like a 100-year lease. So this is not the end. How do I continue to support this? The next couple of years, I expect most of the clients in this building will be 6 gig. So right now we're about 50% 6 gigahertz clients. So if you ever want to see what 6 gigahertz looks like at scale, I've no place you can go. But how are we going to deal with it? Everybody is 6 gig. Obviously, standard power is challenging with self-location requirements in the US. So I can't use directional antennas to get reuse in 6. And so I'm back in the same boat. Not enough capacity in a band, no spectral reuse. What do we do? Well, my hope was MLO was going to be the thing to rescue us, right? Being able to associate to 2 bands at the same time and select which one is, sounds like from some of the other talks this week, that may not necessarily be the short-term solution, but that was my hope. I'm hoping maybe something eases up with either requirements or solutions for 6 gig standard power, but 6 gig discovery, still a problem for us. Most devices, believe it or not, don't scan 2.4 first. And so 6 gig discovery is a little bit slower than we would like because of not advertising in 5 gig. So I'm hoping someday I will get non-co-located R&R to where I can advertise the 6 gig bifurcated AP on the 5 gig radio, which would help. And 11K is a thing that doesn't work because they're 2 different APs, right? And they don't share any of the same bands. So 11AX SR, it's a topic I love to talk about. It's tough. Vendor support is very fragmented. Some vendors don't support it at all. Some vendors support it by default in 6 gig only, but no knobs to be able to configure at what level. And some vendors give you all the knobs in the world. But when you stop demodulating things, visibility for some of those things gets difficult. So, is it working? Are we doing a good job? Those are really tough to measure. It's been that way since the Cisco RX SOP days. Who knows, right? But those are the things we're looking at in the near future in terms of what's next to help improve the situation.